The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Glory to you, O Lord. Now, very large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and when he turned to them, he said, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build a tower and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. So earlier this week when we were starting to plan for Sunday's service, Pastor Nathan joked that I've been getting all the fun Bible readings lately. Yay! Here we go for another comfort and peace sermon in Jesus, right? I promise it's good. Okay, so Jesus' words, we just have to say, they sound a little extreme today, right? Yes, they sound pretty extreme, in fact. Where else in the scriptures do we hear Jesus say that you should, in fact, hate your father and mother, your wife and children, your brother and sister, and that you have to sell all your possessions if you want to be a disciple of Christ? In fact, the answer is there is no other place in the Bible where Jesus says this, because Jesus does not talk about these things in the scriptures. So what is afoot? What is going on here? It sounds extreme today when we crack open the gospel and hear Jesus say that we are supposed to hate three things that we love very much. Categorically, our family, life itself, Jesus says we should hate, and all of our stuff. And here he does say all. We do kind of like our stuff. We live in a capitalist culture. We like our things, don't we? Yes, we do. Okay, so here is what we know. I did a little search yesterday, and I found that in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are exactly 0 times when Jesus commands us to hate anyone or anything. 0 times in the Gospels. Jesus does address the experience of hate and its consequences, meaning what is the spiritual harm that is done when one does hate someone else. Jesus talks about this. Jesus also addresses the experience of being the target of hate. He talks about this in the Gospels. However, Jesus unequivocally never ever tells us in the Gospels to hate anyone or anything. So, if your faith has led you to a place of hatefulness towards someone else, it is not because of your faith and you are doing it wrong. Jesus does not tell us to hate in the name of Christ. Often, Jesus, in fact, flips the tables on us and tells us to love people and things that normally we might just be oriented to hate. He often leads us back to a place of love. So, as in a number of places in the scriptures, Jesus is not being literal. This is not to dismiss what he is saying, it is to give you a little peel back the curtain to see actually what is up with Jesus' words here. Jesus is employing today in this reading the literary device of hyperbole. Have you heard of this? Hyperbole, according to Merriam-Webster, is making intentionally exaggerated claims that are not to be taken literally in order to make a point. Okay? exaggerated claims not to be taken literally for effect. When have we not, in fact, made an exaggerated claim to our child to try to get them to do something or to make a point for them? Oh, your room is fine. I don't see a problem. It's not messy. Okay, yeah. Jesus is using hyperbole to make a point with us today. Here's what I think the point is. Jesus, I think, in all of this interesting speech about hate, is trying to tell us that a life of discipleship, or following Jesus in this life in the world, is a wholehearted, all-encompassing, total way of life that can and should and will impact every other aspect of your life, including the things you love the most, like your family, like the way you live your life in the world, like your relationship to stuff and how you handle your possessions and your resources. Your life of faith will impact all of this and more, which means that faith is not a compartmentalized slice of our life. It is not just about what happens in this room. Faith is not just about what happens in this building. Faith is not only about what we do on Sundays or Wednesdays or when we're having our personal devotion time with Jesus in the morning or whatever time you do that of the day. Faith is an all-encompassing factor that impacts the way you do everything else in your life, because it is an open-hearted, wholehearted, totality experience that leaves no area of your life untouched, including your relationships not only with people or with your family, but with people. That includes your relationships with material items and other stuff. Faith impacts your perspectives and your opinions in the world. It impacts your ideas and your ideals. And it even impacts your politics and the way you vote. Faith, then, is impacted everything else in your life because you are striving to follow Jesus in the world. In fact, when Jesus then says today, in verse 27, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Here is my image for you to take today as you think about that faith touches everything else in your life. A faith that carries the cross is a life that is shaped like the cross, meaning it has a vertical direction and a horizontal direction. I minced my words, but you get the point. Faith has a vertical direction in that there is a relationship between us and God, right? God is everywhere, not specifically up there, but often we think about God being up here and everywhere, so this is the vertical direction. Faith that is impacted by everything is about God loves me and I love God in this vertical relationship. But it's not only that. Faith also has a horizontal aspect in the shape of the cross. Because God loves me and I love God, now I am called to love others in the name of Christ. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors as yourself. Which also, by the way, does include yourself. It doesn't say that we have to, ignore our own needs and wants, but also others as yourself, right? Okay? So a life, then, that takes up the cross and carries the cross and follows Jesus is a life that is shaped by the cross, that seeks and asks how all of my words and all of my actions and all of my choices reflect an ethic of love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors as yourself. So, as we continue on in this reading, we might wonder what all of the business about building towers and waging war is about. Here's my thematic interpretation for you about this as we think about an all-encompassing, wholehearted faith that impacts everything in your life. Here it is. When Jesus speaks about the man who builds the tower and the king who's deciding to wage war, he describes the act of being thoughtful and intentional about your choices and your actions and your thoughts and your treatment of others. That does not haphazardly go dancing through life as though nothing matters and nothing really matters. So just keep dancing through, right? Instead, if we are to be like the person building the watchtower, we think ahead of time how our words and our actions and our choices might either align with our life of faith to love God and love others, or be a detriment to that and not live in service to that value. A life that is intentional and thoughtful and computes the cost or the likely outcome of how our actions will be carried out in the world and impact our neighbors and our love for God might consider how we might move through the world in a different way than simply running haphazardly and assuming that everything will be fine, right? What would the world look like if more of us, more of the time, could compute the possible outcome of our actions and our choices, not only asking, what do I want and what do I want to do, but perhaps also asking, what might God be calling me to do? How might Christ be asking me to love bigger and more boldly and more broadly out in the world because of this cross-shaped ethic and love and life before we decide how we will act and what we will say and what we will do and how we will vote and what our choices are as we live in this complicated and messy but beautiful world that God gets us to live in. So today, as we think about all of this, hear the good news. A life that is shaped by Christ, a life that strives to follow Jesus out in the world, is shaped by the life of the cross. Open-hearted, wholehearted, a life that in the cross is where we live and move and have our being. Not because we are guaranteed a better outcome for me, myself, and I in the world if we do this, but because Christ has called us to love and live in this way, following the example that Jesus gives us in the Gospels and in the Bible and all throughout the world. Let us follow in the cross-shaped life of Christ, loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. For this we give thanks to God that we get to participate in this. It is not God's work alone. It is ours to take up our cross and follow, not with obligation and drudgery, but with joy and freedom because God calls us to be part of God's good and loving work in the world. So thanks be to God, and amen.